Also, before I start, I want to say something. It was like 8 in the morning when I made this video, and that's why I'm over there for half of the video going, like, it gets better. Just know that. Look, I know most of you only clicked on this video because you saw the thumbnail, and you already have a paragraph long comment that's angry at me, but hear me out. Now, first of all, let me be clear. ReZero is a fantastic isekai and a fantastic psychological thriller. We all know Subaru goes through mental breakdowns and traumatic experiences, and it's fun to watch, but that's if you want a constant survival game that just constantly tortures its main character, then ReZero is perfect. But when we talk about a complete story that hits every aspect perfectly, it's not ReZero. It's Mushoku Tensei. So we're going to put the trauma loops aside and look at why Mushoku Tensei outclasses ReZero in world building, pacing, themes, and most importantly, just raw character development. By the end of this video, I hope you understand why my point stands to this, and either you'll hate me or I'll convince you enough. To convince you of this, we have to start with the absolute beginning of any fantasy story, which is the world building. This is where the gap between these two stories is a massive difference. When you watch ReZero, Lugunica is cool, all the other great nations are cool, but it often feels just like a highly elaborate escape room designed specifically for Subaru. Let's really think about the structure of Tape's writing. Think about the Sanctuary in Arc 4, or the Roswell Mansion in Arc 2. These locations effectively pause when Subaru isn't interacting with them. The narrative is entirely tunnel visioned. The world practically revolves around his checkpoints. And the side characters are beautifully written, but they largely act as mechanisms to either kill Subaru or fix his emotional state. If Subaru isn't in the room practically seems to cease to exist. And with the ending of Core 1, it gives a massive example of this. The rage that Rim had was solely there to focus more on Subaru, and the ending scene with Amelia's heartfelt speech to make Subaru try harder for his next loop, proving that they are solely there to focus more on Subaru. Now, Mushoku Tensei, on the other hand, gives us the six-sided world. I mean, it is just a map with some fancy names slapped on it. It feels like an actual living, breathing ecosystem. I'm gonna butcher the author's name if I say it, but I'll just put it on screen. He didn't write just a setting, he wrote what feels like an actual functioning reality. So, firstly, let's look at the sheer and overwhelming depth of the world building and lore for Mushoku Tensei. When Rudius gets sent to the Demon Continent in the light novel Volume 3, the author goes insanely hard on the socioeconomics. We don't just get told that the Demon Continent is a dangerous place. We learn that they barter with monster parts because crops don't grow. We learned about the century old geopolitical fallout of the Laplace War and how it created systematic racism against the superb tribe. So, firstly, the politics. The Asura Kingdom has a massive war that is happening completely independently of the main cast. The only politics we see in ReZero is the royal selection. Next, the religion. The Milith faith isn't just the good guys. It's a deeply structured and heavily flawed religious organization with factions and internal corruption. ReZero has the Tome of Wisdom, which is pretty much centered around Echidna, and then it has the Witches cult in the Divine Dragon Church. But we have yet to see a lot of depth on either of those subjects besides the Witches cult, because that's the pretty much the main premise. And then you have the logistics. They actually created distinct speakable language for the different continents. Rudius doesn't just automatically understand everyone. He has to study the demon god language and the beast god language so he doesn't get ripped off or murdered. Of course, ReZero had this too with the four great nations, but the only one that was culturally different was Kararagi, and Subaru was already familiar with that because it was literally made to be like Japan. But in ReZero, when do we actually hear about the other nations besides when Subaru is providing some significance to them? Mushoku Tensei's world can exist completely independent of the protagonist, which makes the immersion infinitely deeper than ReZero's loop-centric setting. If Rudy has died tomorrow, the Asura Kingdom would still go on, the religion would still preach, and the world would still turn. Now, let's talk about pacing. This is where ReZero defenders usually bring up the slow parts of Mushoku Tensei, but they completely missing the point of what makes a story resonant long term. ReZero is a roller coaster. It hooks you with relentless anxiety, brutal cliffhangers, and non-stop suffering. Take Arc 4. That entire massive arc covers well over 100 chapters. But in universe, it spans pretty much a few weeks. Think about that. You're reading hundreds of pages of dense psychological torture that happens over the course of a single month for Subaru. It's thrilling, but it's also exhausting. It really gives the story or the viewer room to just breathe. This arguably keeps the story interesting, but sometimes it's nice to just sit back and watch the world unfold for the protagonist. While Mushoku Tensei has the confidence to take its time, we literally follow Rudius from the day he's born to the day he dies. The pacing is something that can take an entire lifetime and still feel interesting. Look at light novel volumes 8 through 11, which is the Renoa Magic Academy arc. This is where some anime only fans call this slice of life or boring, but is fundamentally crucial to the story. This is where Rudius actively learns how to socialize, how to research, and how to build political alliances, like with Ariel and Zenoba, and most importantly, how to heal from his trauma. Because this story spans literal decades, the pacing allows you to live his life with him, rather than just watching him frantically try to survive the next disaster. When the characters reunite after 5 years, they've actually aged. They have new scores, new beliefs, and new trauma. ReZero forces its characters to mature through non-stop brutalization over a few months. Mushoku Tensei lets its characters mature through the organic and natural passage of time. So, ReZero is fundamentally about survival and breaking down his savior complex. As we see deeply in Arc 4, Subaru treats his life like currency, throwing his body away multiple times just to find a perfect timeline. Or, in the greed route, he died over 100 million times just to get the perfect ending. Which you could argue that the greed route isn't canon, but I'm just using it as an example. Now, of course, it takes massive amounts of bravery to throw your life away. Even at times, Subaru isn't sure if he'll actually come back or this might be his last loop. But the theme is about a boy breaking his own mind to save the people he loves. It's compelling, but it's deeply simple. Although it builds his character as someone who does this for other people and shows his progression, such as in Arc 6, after he loses his memories, when talking to Amelia, he says,
Risking his life for others, someone not afraid to take action, someone who won't hesitate to help those he cares about, someone who could put his own life on the line to accomplish what he puts his mind to. Don't lie to me! Someone like that can't be Subaru Natsuki!
Now, like I said, it shows progression, but every bit of his development has come from repetitive trauma dumps, which isn't comparable to Rudius's. While Mushoku Tensei is about redemption and genuinely living a life to the fullest, the title Jobless Reincarnation isn't a joke, it's a core thesis. The protagonist wasted his entire first life being absolute human garbage. When he gets reincarnated, his goal isn't to defeat a demon lord or solve a massive mystery. His goal is simply don't mess up this run. Try to be a decent person this time. Subaru also does this as he never felt like he could live up to expectations he thought were on him in his past life. He thinks of this as a chance to restart, but the author quickly moves on from Subaru's thoughts by placing him in between politics with the royal selection and the history of the world spanning back 400 years. With Mushoku Tensei, look at Volume 7, which is the depressed magician arc. After Eris leaves him, Rudius is utterly broken. He's dealing with severe abandonment issues and genuine, you know, induced by trauma. He doesn't fix this by more trauma being dumped on him to forget or resetting himself like Subaru did after the White Whale when it made everyone forget Rim. Regis handles it with years of slow, painful, and awkward human interactions. It's a much more grounded and universally relatable theme. It's about overcoming deep seated regrets, understanding the value of family, and taking life one day at a time. I mean, as humans, we all have regrets. We all wish we could do things differently. ReZero takes that theme literally and gives Subaru that exact ability of return by death, while Mushoku Tensei captures that universal human longing perfectly, making it feel more real. So, for me, This is the biggest difference on why Rudius' character development is exponentially greater than Subaru. Subaru has great development, but his growth is heavily tied to his return by death ability. Now, of course, Subaru experiences trauma a million times more than anyone in the real world could think. Dying thousands of times would make anyone go insane, but the fact that he can make a mistake, get murdered, and then realize he was being arrogant or stupid and gets a do over to fix it just gets too repetitive. Think about Art 3. Subaru acts like an absolute embarrassment at the royal selection, insults everyone, it gets himself and Amelia killed. What happens? He dies, resets, and eventually figures out the right path. The timeline where he ruined everything is erased from reality. While Rudius, he doesn't get do overs, and that makes his development infinitely more impactful. Let's be brutally honest, Rudius started off as a repulsive, deeply flawed main character. He's a 34-year-old shut-in who brings all of his worst traits into his new life. But when Rudius messes up, he has to live with the consequences forever. And some people might argue that Rudius could never be greater than Subaru because of his predatory acts in his old timeline. But the fact that Mushoku Tensei gives us a flawed main character and shows us his entire life of how he tries to fix it is perfect. Now, Rudius does learn to move on and feel regretful for those actions, which don't fix them, but it shows his true development throughout the story. In volume 26 of the light novel, there's a line that Rudius says. He says, I closed my eyes and thought back on everything that had happened up until now. In this world, I'd done things I wanted to do. I got married, I made friends, I had children, and lots of grandchildren. I even excelled at my job. True, it troubled me to hear the man God talk about the future, and there were things I thought I ought have done different, but somehow, mysteriously, I had no regrets. No, maybe I ought to say, I had no unfinished business. And that line just has one of the biggest impacts that I've ever read to just show that Rudius has truly changed throughout the entire story. Now, I want to talk about two major turning points in the light novels that prove that Rudius experienced much more than Subaru and how it was portrayed a lot better than ReZero was. So, firstly, you have the argument in Miloshon in Volume 5. When Rudius finally reunites with his father, Paul, after the Mana disaster, they have a massive, bitter, and physical fight. They misunderstand each other completely. In ReZero, this would be a bad loop. Subaru would die and fix it. But Rudius can't reset. He has to sit in that uncomfortable, messy reality and figure out how to apologize like a real human being. He has to swallow his pride, walk back into the tavern, and have a painful, honest conversation with his father. So, assuming that you already watched Mushoku Tensei, when you clicked on this video, that's what I intend. But if you haven't, this is massive spoilers, as was pretty much everything I've been talking about. But this one is a really big spoiler. So it's the Labyrinth Rescue in Volume 12. During this time, Rudius makes a major error that costs Paul, his father, their life and caused Rudius his own hand. Now, let that sink in. There is no checkpoint. That character is dead forever. He has to literally carry the physical and emotional scars of that failure for the rest of the series. He has to look Zenith in the eyes. He has to tell Norn what happened. He has to bear the weight of permanent failure. While Subaru learns to accept his flaws by being tortured by the universe, Rudius learns to overcome his flaws by simply growing out of them, making permanent mistakes and actively choosing to be better the next day. Now, at the end, I have to give credit where credit is due. I deeply enjoyed ReZero and Mushoku Tensei, but as someone who enjoys the little things, I just have to give it to Mushoku Tensei. I'm not saying ReZero is bad. It's a phenomenal thriller, but it relies heavily on its own gimmicks to force character growth. Mushoku Tensei does it the hard way. It builds a stunning complex world committed to pacing out an entire human lifespan. It gave us a protagonist who starts at absolute rock bottom and earns every single shred of his redemption. It doesn't rely on shock value or checkpoints. It relies on the beautiful, tragic, and permanent reality of living a life. But at the end, it all comes down to preference. Whether I convinced you or I just made you hate me and never watch another one of my videos again, at least you stayed to hear me say this. And of course, let me know what you think. And if you enjoyed this type of content, make sure to let me know so I can continue to make stuff like this.